sweet friends, to my podcast, Loss and Healing. It's a podcast dedicated to navigating the profound journey of miscarriage grief. I'm your host, Dr. Rachna, and I'm honored to be your guide as we explore the delicate landscape of loss, healing, and hope. My friends, I am so thankful to be sitting here with you today. And I want to talk about a difficult truth that many of us carry after a miscarriage. But rarely do we say this out loud. I want to talk about self-blame today and the stigma that our society, our world attaches to it. If you're like me, you probably thought after a miscarriage, it must be my fault. This happened because I did something wrong. Or maybe you felt the pressure to just move on quickly with your grief. Maybe you didn't even take any days off work. And you just went right back to what we call normal life in our world. But I want to tell you today that you don't need to move on quickly. That you are not alone and that you are not to be blamed for this. You have the right to grieve and process and take the time that you need to heal from this. Miscarriage is a loss that deserves every chance to be grieved, respected, and spoken about without blame. So in this episode, I wanted to unpack where self-blame comes from. How our world, the social stigma, it shapes our experiences. And most importantly, how can I take some practical steps in order to heal, to advocate for yourself, and also to help reduce the stigma for others? This episode is for anyone who has experienced miscarriage. It's also for someone who wants to support their spouse, their partner, their friend, family member, and also just for your own understanding about how stigma shapes grief. So let's start today by just naming what self-blame can sound like in real life. Friends, self-blame after miscarriage often starts with a quiet impulse to control something when so much feels uncertain. I want to talk about some patterns that you may recognize. And I want to do that with a very compassionate and gentle lens. The first one I want to talk about is this guilt that we internalize. When outcomes feel unpredictable, our mind looks for a reason, even when there isn't a clear cause. What I mean by that is, I'll share my own story after my miscarriages, especially the first one. I remember thinking about what could have caused this. I was looking for a reason. Even when the doctors had told me that there was no reason for this miscarriage, I wanted to blame something, someone, so that I could make sense of it, which led me to having this fear and uncertainty. Because often blame can feel like a shield. If I can blame myself, perhaps I can protect myself from further hurt because I must have done something wrong. So I can figure that out. I'm looking for answers. And then from there could be this body-mind narrative, right? The culture that I'm a part of is whispering to me that the pregnancy outcome reflects my own personal responsibility. So I need to figure out what my responsibility was. So instead of taking my loss for what it is, a loss, and that's it, I start putting blame where it doesn't belong, which is towards myself. There's also a pattern of how we analyze the grief. Sometimes you may find yourself that blaming myself feels like a way to make sense of the loss, right? And I'm also shielding anyone around me from the rawness of that pain. And what that can look like and sound like is that I don't talk about it. I hold it in, right? I make myself believe that if I blame myself, then I can make sense of it. And that I shouldn't show my grief because I don't want my spouse, my family, my friends to worry about me or in any way feel like as if this is their fault or have any responsibility in it. So we start putting ourselves in this bubble where we don't allow anyone else to come in. And my friends, I want you to be very careful if you are doing that today. That can lead into some intense emotional distress, which can create a sense of depression, high anxiety, high stress, isolation, and loneliness. And you do not deserve that. You deserve the support, compassion, and love. And we're going to talk about how you can get that for yourself after a miscarriage rather than blaming yourself. Before we get into how society can make us feel blamed for this, I want you to try an exercise, even as you're listening to this podcast today. If at any time you start blaming yourself, if those thoughts arise, if something is whispering in your ears that this is your fault, I want you to pause, take a gentle step back, and tell yourself, this loss is not my fault, and I am allowed to grieve. I am allowed to take care of myself, and I am allowed to take my time as I heal from this trauma, from this loss of a dream. So when you can give yourself permission to just pause and acknowledge what you're feeling in the moment, you're giving yourself permission and telling your body that I'm going to take care of you, that I'm going to acknowledge the pain that you are experiencing right now, and that you are going to choose not to blame yourself, but rather take care of yourself in a way where it's helping you walk that journey of healing, of self-care, and not self-blame and guilt. Part of our conversation today also is about how we can help lessen that stigma that society puts on miscarriages. So with a kinder lens on blame, I wanted to talk a little bit about how society's stories and words can shape our grief and what you and I can do to soften that impact. Society puts such a huge stigma around miscarriages, and it often, reveals itself through language, the expectation from our family, from our spouse, from our friends, and the social pressure that we can experience about becoming a mother, what motherhood means in our environment, in our culture, in our families. The culture that we're a part of tells me that pregnancy is just a pure source of joy, which it is, of course it is. But when a miscarriage happens, it almost feels like, yes, it's sad, but it's not okay to acknowledge it. Because if we can just brush it under the rug, it doesn't exist. We don't have to look at it, right? And I also want to touch on the language that people use towards a miscarriage. Sometimes it's only defined in medical terms, right? Well, you had a chemical pregnancy, or, well, it was a molar pregnancy, as if that makes it okay, as if that's going to make me not blame myself. Or statements such as, it wasn't meant to be. Statements like that can minimize the loss. It can dismiss, it can feel like my pain is being dismissed. Right? Which can then, of course, we've talked about this in another podcast, can lead into feeling like I have to keep this secret, creating isolation around me. And alongside that, this pressure to move on. Here's the thing. If you're in the place where you are already blaming yourself, shutting down, feeling depressed, isolating yourself, that's not a healthy place to be. And we know that logically. And when we layer that with the societal pressure to move on, to have closure before we're even ready to have closure, that can build up a lot of anxiety, shame. It can also keep us from seeking support. And you may be wondering at this point, and even asking me, that Rachna, what do I do? I'm stuck. I can't stop blaming myself. I don't want to interact with people because they have either minimized or dismissed my loss or blamed me. And I'm already blaming myself enough. So what do I do? So here's the first thing I want you to try. I want you to give yourself the same empathy, compassion, care, and love that you give to others, that you pour out into others. I want you to talk to yourself with that same love that you bring to others. I want you to say statements such as, this is not a loss that I caused. I am not to be blamed. This is something that was very tragic that happened in my life. And because of it, I am grieving the loss of a dream, loss of motherhood. So I want to show myself the same love I give to others. I don't want you to sit there looking for reasons to blame yourself. I want you to instead focus back into your body and ask yourself, what is my body needing of me right now? My body is grieving with me. This is not my fault. When we talk to ourselves with compassion and care, we are changing the wiring in our brains. We are teaching our brain something different so that it can start believing in more of the positive statements rather than spiraling into the negative. And when you can start gently speaking to yourself with compassion and gentleness, the next step is to start setting those boundaries with others. And those boundaries are about how much do I want to share with others? And what are they going to do with the information I give them? I always say, know who your audience is and what their motive is for listening and what is your motive for sharing. That way, you can better understand your own narrative and who gets to hear it and who doesn't. But before we even dive into that, I want you to just practice in the next couple of weeks talking to yourself in a more gentle way, giving yourself that compassion and care. Another way to notice how you're feeling is journaling. And I'm not talking about pages and pages of writing, which you can do and it's beautiful. But even if it's bullet points, even if it's you assessing how you're feeling in the morning when you wake up, in the afternoon, in the evening, so you can better understand during what time of the day am I the most stressed? Am I the saddest? Do I have the most anxiety in the evening, or am I struggling with anxiety in the afternoon? What this does is it helps you become more aware of how you're feeling. and what you want to do to take care of yourself. So whether you put it in your phone or you jot it down in a journal, start writing today. Notice what kinds of blaming thoughts are coming to your mind and change them with a more kinder alternative. For example, if you find yourself saying more and more, this was my fault, I should not have exercised more. A kinder alternative is, I was taking care of my body the best I knew. This miscarriage is not my fault. And I always want you to think about, if this was a friend sitting next to me, what would I tell them? And I'm sure you would not be blaming them. So be kind to your heart. Be kind to your mind. You need that right now, and you need to take care of yourself. And I also want you to remember to prioritize sleep, your hydration, making sure that you're eating well. Especially for some of you, I know you are not eating. Make sure that you are. And also, if you can, get out there and move your body a little bit, whether it's with a gentle walk. If you're at a point where you can exercise, go do that. But find a way to move your body. Show it the love and care that it deserves. Because, my sweet friends, your grief is real. And your emotional health is important. I want you to remember that self-blame is a narrative. It's not a fact. And we have the power to reframe it for ourselves, to form a more positive narrative with love, care, and gentleness, and by having the right support system in our lives. So if there are people who are surrounding you with blame, I want you to think about, how can I set some gentle boundaries with them so that I am not constantly bombarded with negativity? Because right now is the time for you to focus in on yourself, to take care of yourself, and love yourself the way you deserve it. So seek the support that is positive, that is kind, a support system that's going to come around you and just envelop you with love. And always remember that every heartbeat matters, even the ones we cannot hear. Sweet friends, I am so honored to be part of this journey with you. If you feel this episode can benefit someone else, please pass it on. Next time, when we meet, we will dive into the topic of setting gentle boundaries with others and protecting your mental health. This is Dr. Rachna, and I will see you all next time. Please take care of yourself.